everyone, it is Dani'i and welcome to this update video this evening. I hope that you have been enjoying your day, and we're going to get straight into what is expected of the tropics. So we'll be looking at what is currently happening across the Atlantic on a whole, and zooming into the Caribbean. And by the way, Depression 21 has dissipated, so just the remnants remain. Still that flood threat for portions of Central America. We'll be talking about that, as well as the latest for Tammy. However, that will be in the latter of this video, as I'm going to be spending some time talking about a new trend I'm seeing and why it is concerning for me. So let's get straight into it. And we're looking at the current satellite imagery. We can see that there is Tammy out there, all that increase in moisture, some of which is associated with a trough out there in the Atlantic. And then as we head closer to the Caribbean, going to Northern South America, we can see that there are all those white dots indicating lightning strikes. So a lot of activity across some areas this afternoon. Let's zoom in closer here. First, we're going to Northern South America, and it is pretty festive out there. Lots of thunderstorms developing across some areas. Earlier in parts of Western Trinidad, there was some activity. Even near Bonaire, in the vicinity of the ABC Islands, we can see that there was some activity earlier. Going over, we can see Panama right there with a lot going on as well. A lot of moisture, which means that there is a high chance of that increase in rainfall activity. As we head to the Lesser Antilles, a bit of activity across some areas earlier today. So all that activity under the influence of Tammy in the vicinity of the Caribbean will soon be no longer. So nothing crazy happening though compared to yesterday for some areas which had actually experienced some flooding. As we head further west, going to some spots in Puerto Rico, even Hispaniola, portions of southern Jamaica as well, there's been some activity. And again, over in Central America, a lot going on with what is left of Depression 21. And to the south of the Turks and Caicos Islands, there you can see that little blob right there drifting to the south that may eventually bring some increase in rainfall activity, maybe even some thunderstorms to portions of Hispaniola. Now let's go ahead and talk about what models are expecting. But this is kind of important here. So this is the updated Global Tropics Hazards Outlook map from the Climate Prediction Center. So for week 2, going from the 1st to the 7th of November, that starts next week, we can see the Atlantic. We're going to be focusing on the Caribbean. We're seeing that red highlight, that red and white striped area, then that area that is just in red. Also seeing those green shadings. What is that representing? The green areas represent a probability of seeing above average rainfall. So for a majority of the Caribbean, excluding the easternmost islands such as the Lesser Antilles, there could be an increase in rainfall activity, but that red and white striped area represents around a 20% chance or less of seeing development. Just that red area, 40% chance. So we can see that for the Western Caribbean, that chance is higher of seeing development. Things will eventually get drier in the main development region as less and less tropical waves make their way off as the season comes to its inevitable close. And even looking toward week 3, which goes from November 8th to the 14th, we can still see that majority of the Caribbean is still in that red and white striped area. So again, that chance of seeing development in the Caribbean is pretty substantial right now. And I mean, as I've showed you if you watch my previous updates, that is a typical origin spot for late season systems, seeing these low pressure areas form and develop into tropical cyclones, and then they make their way up to the north. And that is when they can be a problem for islands such as Jamaica, Cuba, the Cayman Islands, and even for Central America with all that increase in moisture and instability, which causes a lot of heavy rainfall, triggering flooding and mudslides. Let's now see what models have to show, and we're going to kickstart things with GFS. Now, I'm just showing you guys the updates, so please take this with a grain of salt. It is not guaranteed. I do want to point out a trend, however. So with the GFS, there is the time that is as we head out into Sunday the 29th, headed to the latter of the month. There is a trough right there. Notice all those green shadings representing that increase in moisture. That is Tammy up there, which may move out, or it could turn toward the US. There's still a lot of uncertainty with it. As I said, we'll talk more about Tammy later in this update. And then as we head out to Saturday, November 4, we're heading pretty far out here. There we see that trough approaching the vicinity of the Bahamas, Cuba, and even Florida as well, with a lot of increase in moisture. But take a look at that tropical storm developing in the Eastern Caribbean. As we head to Sunday, November 5th, GFS is showing some rapid development, and we're seeing a hurricane strike in Jamaica with a pressure of 984 millibars. That would be around a Cat 1 hurricane, and it strengthens even more as it makes its way to the Northwest Caribbean, potentially striking Grand Cayman as a 968 millibar hurricane that is headed toward major hurricane territory. Again, this is just a forecast, so I really don't want you guys panicking or freaking out. I'm just showing you what the models are depicting. I'll talk about whether this is possible. I'll talk about the factors that would contribute to us actually seeing something develop, not necessarily a major hurricane, but at least a tropical storm as we head into the latter part of next week. Going further out to Thursday the 9th, there we can see an even stronger system, major hurricane making landfall in western Cuba. Again, this is just a forecast, and we know GFS, it is a bullish model at times. Let's head on to Euro. So we can see that as we head into Sunday, there's all that increase in moisture, yes, and we see that area trying to develop as we head out to Tuesday, the 31st of the month. It is going to be under the influence of a front making its way out, so it will be moving out. But again, we still see that moisture increase as we head to Friday, the 3rd of November. That's next Friday. We see an increase in moisture in both the western and the eastern Caribbean, not seeing anything defined. When we see those black lines being closed in that circular manner, for example, what GFS depicted, that is indicative of something developing. Now let's head on to the Canadian model. This is as we head out to Tuesday, the 31st. So we're going into next Tuesday, a week from now. Here we can see that the Canadian is showing that we could have something over in the western Caribbean and even something else, another system in the eastern Caribbean. So as we head to Thursday of next week, there we see that other area trying to develop. So both of those low pressure areas interacting with each other. There's a front right there. So overall, an increase in moisture is likely across the Caribbean. There's likely to be an increase in rainfall, again, for the easternmost islands, the Lesser Antilles, even going down to Trinidad, Tobago, Barbados, including the Virgin Islands. There might not be as much for you guys based on what the Climate Prediction Center has highlighted, but of course, I'll be keeping you posted. Finally, we're going on to the Icon model, another of the pretty accurate models out there. Let's take a look at it. This is as we head out into this weekend, headed to the end of this week, going into early next week. We can see that low pressure area forming to the south of Jamaica. That's Dani'i. And then as we head out to Monday the 30th, next Monday, we can see that the icon is showing that at that time, a tropical storm will be making landfall in Jamaica before crossing into the vicinity of Cuba and then the Bahamas. So quite interesting here. All of these models are showing hints that we could see something. Now, at times, Euro can be quite conservative. GFS goes bullish. Icon stays just in the midst of things, and the Canadian model is also pretty good at times. So I really think that we will see something form. Going back to this, as I showed you guys in previous updates, again, if you watch them, this is a typical origin spot in the Caribbean. These low pressure areas can sometimes form and then they move up north under the influence of the fronts making their way out of the US. So I'm definitely thinking that we could see something form, but how strong could it get? That will all depend on one big factor, the wind shear. So when that wind shear is very strong, those winds in the upper levels of the atmosphere, they're quite strong. They basically rip up the thunderstorms and prevent whatever is trying to form from forming much and actually weakening and dissipating the system eventually. There's not a huge issue right now with dry air across the Caribbean. Let's go on to that map, and in those areas of oranges and reds and yellows, that is indicating the dry air. That mess of dry air is likely in association with some of that dust which has made its way from Africa, the Saharan air layer, and then also we can see all that dry air off the coast of the US. That is cool dry air which has made its way down from Canada. So pretty stable environment for those areas, but as we can see for the Southern Caribbean, there isn't much, so this is not going to be a problem for the system. But what could fuel the system is the very warm, the anomalously warm waters of the Caribbean. So we're taking a look at the sea surface temperature map. So the temperature of the surface in the Caribbean, we're focusing on the Caribbean here, we're seeing 30, 31 degrees Celsius in some areas. So it is very warm. Matter of fact, going on to this anomaly map here, when we're seeing that more vibrant shading of those reds and oranges, that is representing warmer waters than normal. That is what the anomaly map is. It shows how much the temperature is varying from what is typical at that time on a 30-year average. And so with nothing major really being in the Caribbean, aside from systems such as Franklin and even Idalia, which formed in the northwestern Caribbean, there hasn't really been anything much to really take away some of that heat. So looking at this map here, this is the ocean heat content map. Now, as we head more to that darker red shade, that is a lot of energy available for these developing low pressure areas. What happens sometimes with tropical cyclones which move through is that they take up some of that energy, and that results in cooler water from further beneath the surface making its way to the top to replace that lost warm water that the tropical cyclone or whatever it's forming is using up. That is a phenomenon called upwelling. Now, we haven't had much in the Caribbean. As we have seen, many of the storms have been staying out to sea, so we could definitely see something rapidly form in the Caribbean. I'm not going to be taking a hurricane off the table either. I'm not saying it will happen, guys, so I'm just saying heads up if you're in the Caribbean, especially the Western Caribbean, my fellow Jamaicans, persons in the Cayman Islands, Cuba, even going to the Bahamas, and of course for Central America, especially with all that moisture increase. So there could be something on the horizon. We're seeing that models are pointing toward that happening as we head into next week. And so let's now go ahead and quickly take a look at the latest for Tammy. Here is the hurricane. As we can see, it is not looking the best right now, and actually it is sustaining winds at 75 miles per hour. Now, it is expected to remain a hurricane through to early on Thursday. As we can see, that's H, that represents a hurricane, but that white circle with that S represents a post-tropical cyclone, meaning that it will be losing its tropical cyclone characteristics. Now, it could still be very close into the vicinity of Bermuda. It could still bring those impacts as we head into this weekend, but based on what I'm seeing with the track guidance, we can see that models are now, yes, showing the system loitering around for a bit before eventually making its way out. So contrary to what was expected before, with the system making a very close approach to the US, potentially moving down into the Bahamas, into Florida, that is not really being seen as much. It's still possible, I will say that. And in reality, as I said before, there's still a lot of uncertainty on the table. So I will keep you guys posted. Again, if you're in the Western Caribbean, I will keep you guys updated on what is happening. So that is what I wanted to share with you in this update, and I trust and hope you found it to be quite informative. However, if you have any questions, as always, please do leave them in the comments. I'll respond once I get the chance to do so. And remember to always be weatherwise.